The rain was merciless. It came down in silver sheets, slanting sideways in the wind, drenching everything it touched. Walter Hayes hunched beneath the narrow awning of a closed hardware store on Main Street, clutching a fan of damp lottery tickets in his trembling hands. His old raincoat, patched and fraying at the shoulders, leaked badly. Cold rivulets found their way down his back, soaking the waistband of his trousers. People rushed past without looking at him. Collars up, umbrellas angled forward, minds fixed on getting home. Walter shifted his weight from one aching knee to the other, hoping against hope someone might stop. Then a flash of red. A bright umbrella broke through the gray, and under it, a young woman stepped toward him. Her coat was wet at the hem, her dark hair plastered against her cheeks, but her eyes were steady. "How many you got left?" she asked. Walter blinked. "All of them. I'll take them." Before he could protest, she was pulling bills from her wallet, sliding the tickets into a clear plastic sleeve from her tote bag, and pressing the cash into his palm. "Go home, sir. Get warm." She was gone before he could even ask her name. Before the storm, Walter Hayes was a man who could vanish in plain sight. He had lived in Brookfield, Ohio, for almost 20 years, yet he could walk down Main Street without anyone remembering his face. That suited him fine. Anonymity had a certain comfort. But anonymity didn't pay the bills. Walter was 74. His hair, once thick and sandy, had thinned to wisps the color of steel wool. He had a way of folding into himself when he walked, shoulders hunched forward as if bracing against a lifetime of wind. His knees ached on cold mornings, his hands shook when he reached for coins, and the skin around his eyes was a road map of creases. Every morning, just after 8, Walter left his rented room above Delaney's Pawn and Gun with a neat stack of Ohio State lottery tickets in his satchel. The tickets were his only livelihood, bought in bulk from the authorized vendor downtown and sold one by one on the streets. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady enough to cover rent, a bag of groceries each week, and his electricity bill. On rare occasions, a customer would win a small prize and come back to thank him, but mostly people bought in silence, handed over a few dollars, and walked away without eye contact. Walter had been doing this for years, since after Martha died. She'd been the one with steady hands and a sharp mind for numbers. She could balance their checkbook without ever needing a calculator. When she passed, the savings dwindled quickly. Their daughter, Lydia, had offered to help, but Walter couldn't bring himself to live on his child's money. Lydia had her own life in Portland, and besides, she called less and less these days. Brookfield was a small enough town that you could walk its length in under an hour, and Walter knew every block. He rotated his selling spots, depending on the day, outside the post office on Mondays, near the coffee shop on Wednesdays, and in front of the old hardware store when the weather was bad. The store had been closed for years, but its awning still offered the only patch of shelter on that end of Main Street. On good days, Walter could sell out by 5 p.m. and treat himself to a hot meal at the diner on Lincoln Avenue. On bad days, he walked back to his room with unsold tickets and a hollow feeling in his stomach. He told himself tomorrow would be better. The quiet routine. Walter's life followed the same rhythm for so long that the days blurred together. He woke at 6:30, boiled water for instant coffee, and listened to the morning news on his old radio. The voices from the radio were sometimes the only voices he heard before noon. The streets of Brookfield were calm in the mornings, just delivery trucks, school buses, and the occasional jogger. By mid-morning, more people would appear, heading to the grocery store or the bank. Walter had learned to read people from a distance. The hurried ones never stopped. The ones with their phones out wouldn't even notice him, but the ones walking slowly, looking around, might take a ticket. It was during these hours that Walter often thought about Martha. She would have hated seeing him out here in the cold, chasing sales from strangers. But she would have also known better than to try to change his mind. He was stubborn that way. The weather turns. The week of the storm had been brutal. Brookfield's October weather could turn on a dime. Warm sunshine in the morning, biting wind by afternoon. On Monday, a light drizzle had kept most people indoors. Tuesday was worse. A sudden downpour at noon wiped out his lunch crowd. By Wednesday, Walter was already behind on sales for the week, and Thursday morning brought a thick layer of clouds that promised more trouble. Still, he couldn't afford to stay home. Rent was due in less than 2 weeks, and the landlord, Mr. Cruz, had a way of reminding him with notes slid under his door in large block letters. Rent by the 1st, and no exceptions. Walter pulled on his raincoat, a relic from the 1990s with a broken zipper, and headed for Main Street. His knees protested each step. The air smelled like wet asphalt. By the time he reached the old hardware store, the wind had picked up. Leaves skittered across the sidewalk, chasing each other like startled mice. He arranged the tickets carefully in his hand, fanning them out just enough to display the numbers without risking the wind snatching them away. The storm hits. At first, the rain came in hesitant drops. Walter thought maybe he could wait out, sell a few tickets before the real weather arrived. But within minutes, the sky darkened to a shade of iron, and the rain began in earnest. It wasn't a gentle fall. It was a relentless assault. The wind drove it sideways, turning the awning into little more than a decorative strip. The tickets grew damp, no matter how tightly he clutched them. His coat leaked down the back, cold water pooling at his waistband. People hurried past in clusters, umbrellas tilted like shields. Walter tried calling out, his voice rasping against the sound of the rain, but no one stopped. A mother pulled her child closer as they passed. A man in a baseball cap glanced at him and then looked away. Walter's shoulders sagged. He thought about packing up, taking the loss for the day, maybe finding something warm at the diner if he could justify the cost. His fingers ached from gripping the soggy tickets. The red umbrella. And then, as if from nowhere, a spot of color pierced the gray. A red umbrella bobbed through the curtain of rain, heading straight toward him. The young woman beneath, it was in her 20s, maybe early 30s. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks. Her boots splashed through puddles without hesitation. She stepped under the awning, folding the umbrella halfway. Her eyes landed on the tickets. "How many you got left?" Walter blinked rain from his lashes. "All of them. I'll take them." He opened his mouth to ask why, but she was already reaching into her tote bag. She pulled out a clear plastic sleeve, slid the tickets inside, and handed him a crisp stack of bills. Her hands were warm despite the chill. "Go home, sir. Get warm," she said, meeting his eyes with a quiet insistence. And just like that, she stepped back into the rain, red umbrella opening above her like a flare in the storm. Within seconds, she was gone, swallowed by the wet blur of Main Street. The bell over the door chimed softly as HarperCollins pushed her way into Redfern Coffee. The warm air hit her like a blanket, carrying the familiar scent of espresso, cinnamon, and fresh pastries. She set her dripping red umbrella in the corner and rubbed her hands together to chase away the cold. Her assistant manager, Carla, looked up from behind the counter. "You're soaked," Carla said, raising an eyebrow. "Storm's bad out there," Harper replied, pulling off her coat. "And I just met someone who's been standing in it for hours." Carla tilted her head. "Who?" "An older man, selling lottery tickets under the old hardware store awning." Harper's voice carried a mix of disbelief and admiration. He was completely drenched. His tickets were soaked through. Carla frowned. "That's awful." Harper didn't say much else right away. She moved behind the counter, poured herself a coffee, and sat at one of the corner tables where she could see the rain streaking the front windows. Why, she noticed. Harper wasn't the type to stop for every stranger. She'd grown up in Brookfield, left for college in Columbus, then returned after her mother passed to run the coffee shop. Small towns had their share of familiar faces, and she'd seen her fair share of street vendors and panhandlers. But something about the way Walter had stood there, quiet, shoulders hunched against the wind, not calling out to people, just waiting, had struck her. It wasn't pity exactly. It was more like recognition. Her father had been a postal worker for 35 years. Rain, snow, heat, he'd gone out no matter what. Harper had watched him come home, soaked to the bone more than once, too proud to ever complain. Walter had that same look in his eyes, the tired resilience of someone who'd stopped expecting life to get easier. The photo. Harper reached in her tote bag and pulled out the clear plastic sleeve she'd given Walter earlier. It was empty now. She'd taken the tickets out once she was inside and set them on her kitchen counter to dry. She wasn't planning to use them. She barely ever played the lottery. But she'd snapped a quick photo of Walter before leaving, almost without thinking. The image was still on her phone. Walter, hunched under the awning, the rain blurring the background, his hands clutching the tickets like fragile pieces of gold. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she opened Facebook. On Redfern Coffee's business page, she began typing. This is Walter. He sells lottery tickets on Main Street, rain or shine. Today, the storm was relentless, but he was still out there, quietly waiting for someone to stop. If you see him, buy a ticket. Even one. Let's show him Brookfield cares. She hesitated, wondering if it was intrusive to post his photo without asking. But she told herself she'd blurred the background enough that it felt respectful. She hit post before she could overthink it. The first shares. The post didn't explode instantly. At first, a few loyal customers liked it, leaving heart emojis and comments like I've seen him before. And what a sweet man. By the end of her lunch rush, it had been shared 20 times. By the time she locked the doors that evening, it was over 50. People she didn't know were tagging friends, saying things like, let's find him tomorrow, or I'll bring him some coffee if I see him. Harper didn't know it yet, but by morning, Walter's face would be on dozens of Brookfield community groups, and people from neighboring towns would start asking for his usual selling spots. Harper's evening. That night, after closing the shop, Harper walked the 2 blocks back to her apartment. The storm had finally calmed to a drizzle, but the streets still glistened under the lamplight. She thought about Walter, whether he'd made it home without getting sick, whether he had heated his place, whether he'd even understood why she'd bought all his tickets. Harper wasn't trying to be a hero. She'd bought them because it felt wrong to walk away, because she could see the cold settling into his bones. But she also knew the internet had a strange power. Sometimes it ignored people like Walter, and sometimes it wrapped around them like a quilt. She hoped for the latter. The next morning, Harper arrived at Redfern Coffee early the next day, carrying a box of muffins and a thermos of black coffee. She didn't expect Walter to be there. He usually set up later, but she wanted to check the hardware store corner just in case. He wasn't there. The awning dripped quietly, the sidewalk empty except for a scattering of wet leaves. Back at the shop, she opened Facebook to see the post progress. Her eyes widened. Overnight, the shares had tripled. Comments poured in. We saw him last week outside the post office. My mom bought a ticket from him years ago. Does anyone know where he lives? Harper smiled to herself, but felt a small pang of worry. She didn't want Walter to feel ambushed or put on display. Day 2. By the second day after the post, customers were coming into Redfern Coffee not just for lattes and pastries, but to ask about Walter. Harper repeated what little she knew. He sold tickets around Main Street, sometimes outside the post office, sometimes near the diner. That evening, a customer came in carrying a grocery bag. I'm looking for Walter, she told Harper. I brought him some soup and bread. Harper didn't know where to send her. It occurred to her then that she had no idea where Walter lived. Day 3, the knock. On the 3rd morning after the storm, Harper was mid-shift when her phone buzzed. It was Carla, calling from the front of the shop. You're not going to believe this, Carla said, sounding half amused, half stunned. There's a post on the Brookfield community group. Walter's address is out. People are lining up at his building. Harper felt a jolt in her stomach. She set down her mug. Lining up? Yeah, like bringing him stuff. Food, blankets, even envelopes. It's wild. Harper didn't know whether to be thrilled or uneasy. She closed up early, grabbed her red umbrella, and headed toward the address listed in the post. The visit. Walter's building was an old 3-story walk-up on the edge of downtown. When Harper turned the corner, she saw them. A line of people stretching from the front door to halfway down the block. Some carried grocery bags. Others held coffee cups or small boxes. Kids clutched drawings made with crayons. Harper joined the end of the line, listening as people chatted about seeing Walter's photo, about wanting to help. She realized that in just 3 days, this man who'd once been invisible to the town had become a kind of quiet celebrity. When she finally reached his door, Walter looked at her with a mixture of confusion and warmth. You again, he said softly. Me again, Harper smiled, holding out a paper cup of hot tea. Told you to stay warm. Walter Hayes woke before sunrise, not because of the rain or the usual creaks of the old building, but because the smell of fresh bread lingered in his apartment. He lay in bed for a moment, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling fan above him. The events of the day before still didn't feel real. He lived in Brookfield long enough to know how quickly the world moved past a man like him. But now, there were grocery bags lining his walls, stacked boxes by the window, envelopes on the table. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the cold linoleum floor biting at his feet. As he shuffled toward the small kitchenette, he passed a crate filled with canned soup, pasta, and coffee grounds. On the counter, 3 loaves of bread leaned against a jar of peanut butter. A plaid blanket, brand new, still with its tag, was draped over the back of his one chair. A strange new reality. Walter had never been one for clutter, but now every surface was occupied. A carton of milk sat in his mini fridge beside a wedge of cheese and fresh fruit, things he hadn't bought for himself in months. He poured himself a cup of instant coffee, though the counter was crowded with more luxurious options: ground Arabica beans, herbal tea bags, even a tin of cocoa. He wasn't sure why, but he stuck with what he knew. The knock on the door came at exactly 7:15 a.m. When he opened it, a man he didn't recognize was standing there holding a newspaper. "Morning," the man said. "I'm from the Brookfield Gazette. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Walter blinked. "About what?" "About you, sir. You've been all over Facebook this week." The weight of attention. Walter didn't know what to say. He mumbled something about not being ready for visitors this early, and the man nodded politely before leaving his card. But as Walter closed the door, a flicker of unease passed through him. He'd been invisible for years, and now everyone seemed to know his name. By mid-morning, more knocks came: neighbors, strangers, people he'd never seen before. Some brought food. Some handed him small envelopes with "For Walter" scrawled on the front. He thanked each one, but with every new gesture, the pressure in his chest grew. It wasn't that he wasn't grateful. He was. But he couldn't help wondering, what happens when all this stops? Stepping outside. Around 11, Walter decided he needed air. He pulled on his coat, careful not to step on the bags lining the hallway, and made his way down the narrow stairs. The building's front door opened to Main Street, and for a moment, Walter froze. People were out there, lots of them, and they were looking at him. "Hey, Walter," a woman called from across the street. She waved, smiling wide. A man exiting the diner clapped him on the shoulder. "You're a tough one, Walter. Saw that picture of you in the rain. Brookfield's proud of you." Proud? The word felt strange in his ears. At the corner, Walter wandered to the old hardware store, the same awning where he'd stood 3 days earlier. He hadn't planned to sell tickets that day, but his hands had brought the bundle out of habit. It didn't take long before people approached. They didn't just buy tickets, they lingered. One woman told him her father used to sell newspapers in that same spot. A teenager shyly asked if he could take a selfie with him. Walter felt as though the entire town had shifted around him. Meeting Harper again. Around lunchtime, he saw her, red umbrella in hand, even though the rain was only a mist now. Harper Collins crossed the street toward him, her expression warm but measured. "You're out here again," she said. "Can't break the routine," Walter replied, managing a small smile. She studied him for a moment. "You okay with all this attention?" Walter hesitated. "I'm still figuring that part out." Harper nodded. "People mean well, but it's a lot, I know." She stayed for a few minutes, buying another ticket she clearly didn't intend to scratch. Before leaving, she added, "If it gets overwhelming, you can always come by the shop. No cameras, no fuss." A memory resurfaces. That night, Walter sat in his chair, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, thinking about something he hadn't in years: the day he first moved to Brookfield. Back then, he'd arrived with 2 suitcases and a belief that he could start over quietly, without drawing attention. Now, it seemed the opposite had happened. And while a part of him liked the warmth of it all, another part feared what would happen when the novelty wore off. A letter. Among the pile of envelopes, one caught his eye. It was handwritten in neat cursive. "Dear Walter, I don't know you, but I saw your picture and thought you should know. This town notices you now. Don't be afraid to let it. A friend." Walter read it twice before setting it on the table. He didn't know who had written it, but the word stayed with him long after the lights went out. Walter Hayes didn't wake to the smell of bread this time. He woke to the sound of a hammer, measured, gentle taps that didn't belong in his building. For a moment he thought he'd dreamed it, some echo of a life he hadn't lived in decades, back when he still owned tools and a shed, and weekends meant fixing what time had loosened. Then the tapping came again, definite and bright, like a neighbor knocking from far away. By habit, Walter went first to the radio, switched it on, and let the quiet murmur of the local station fill his one-room apartment. He boiled water, stirred instant coffee until the foam settled, and only then remembered he'd planned to go out earlier than usual. The town had grown interested. He wanted some air before the day found him. He shrugged into his coat, the one with the stubborn zipper, and made his way down the stairwell, careful of the paper grocery bags that had colonized the steps. On the second-floor landing, someone had left a note taped to the wall with blue painter's tape. "Thank you for being you, Walter. A friend." He smiled despite himself, then kept going. Main Street met him in a clean, late-autumn light. The storm had rinsed the town, and the morning after had polished it. He could smell damp leaves and coffee on the air, that mix that felt both brisk and generous. He turned toward the old hardware store, the muscle memory of routine steering his feet, and then he saw it. Where the broken awning had been his only shelter days earlier, something new stood at the corner. A small wooden booth, waist-high, with a slanted roof and a lip around its counter to keep things from sliding off. The wood still glowed with fresh sealant, and someone had stenciled the words Walter's Tickets in neat black letters across the front, the apostrophe carved with a steady hand. Walter stopped. For a long moment, he didn't move at all. The booth was simple, but precise, the corners mitered, the roof shingled, the counter sanded smooth. He reached out, ran his fingers along the grain, and felt the give of new pine. Like it? A voice called. He turned. A man in his 60s, red ball cap, flannel jacket. The face was familiar from the diner. "It's for me?" Walter asked, hearing how foolish the question sounded even as he said it. The man chuckled. "Unless there's another Walter selling tickets on this corner." He stuck out a hand. "Name's Earl. VFW Post. We heard you could use something a little sturdier than that old awning. A few of us got together last night." Walter shook his hand, felt the strength in the grip, the warmth in the gesture. He tried to say thank you and found the word too small. "It's beautiful," he managed. It'll do," Earl said. "We had help from the high school woodshop. Mr. Alvarez's class cut the panels. The roof shingles came from Delaney at the pawn place. Turns out he had a box from a remodel. Harper kept us all in coffee till midnight." At the mention of her name, Walter glanced down the block. Redfern Coffee's windows glowed with the morning trade. He pictured Harper setting paper cups on a workbench. Her red umbrella hung on a hook nearby, like a lantern at rest. "Go on," Earl said. "Make yourself at home." Walter stepped behind the booth. The counter came to his waist at just the right height. No more juggling tickets against wind and rain. Someone had placed a small hook beneath the roof where a flashlight hung, and in one corner sat a tin box with a slot in the lid and a strip of masking tape labeled change in tidy block letters. Walter set his satchel on the shelf below, smoothed his stack of tickets onto the counter, and, without meaning to, stood a little taller. He didn't notice the line at first. It formed while he was still running his palms across the counter's edge, learning its shape. A woman in a green scarf, then a man in construction boots with a thermos, then two school kids who whispered to each other before taking a place in the queue. When Walter looked up, there were 6 people waiting, hands in pockets, faces open. "Morning, Walter," the woman in the green scarf said. "2 tickets, please." "Just one for me," the man in boots added. "And a muffin." "Kidding. I brought you one, though." He set a paper bag on the corner of the booth, pushed it toward Walter. "Blueberry." They did not rush away. They lingered, asked about the weather, asked if he'd slept all right. Someone pointed up at the little ridge of shingles and admired the handiwork, and Earl, still nearby, tipped the brim of his cap with quiet pride. By 9:30, the booth had collected a scatter of small gifts. The blueberry muffin, a soft pair of knit gloves, a travel-size bottle of hand sanitizer, a knit cap and a color Walter would never have bought for himself, but found he liked anyway. He accepted each thing and set it carefully on the shelf, naming it in his head as if committing it to a ledger. Muffin from Boots. Gloves from Scarf. Cap from a boy with a shy smile. Sometime before 10, Harper arrived. She didn't make an entrance. She slipped into the pace of the morning the way a familiar song blends into a room. The red umbrella dangled from her forearm like a habit she couldn't shake even on dry days. She came up to the counter and rested her hands on the edge, palms down, as if feeling the workmanship. "So," she said, chin tilted, eyes on the lettering, "do we approve?" Walter looked at her for a beat too long. "We approve," he said finally, and found himself laughing quietly when he said it. An easy, unguarded sound he almost didn't recognize as his. "Good," she said. "You should know, it took a village. And a lot of coffee." "Earl told me," Walter said. "The woodshop class. The VFW. Mr. Alvarez threatened to quiz the kids on miter angles if they rushed," Harper said, grinning. They did not rush. A break in the line gave him a moment. Harper reached in her tote, pulled out a small, flat package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought this for the counter," she said, setting it down. Walter peeled back the paper. Inside was a cork tray with a shallow lip, the kind you set small things in so they don't get lost. Someone had burned a tiny fern into one corner with a wood-burning tool. The lines were delicate, graceful. He touched the edge with a fingertip. "For your pens. Or, change," Harper said, shrugging. "It's perfect," Walter said, and felt the word fit the moment exactly. The morning ran on like that, a rhythm of small transactions and smaller conversations. He sold tickets and, increasingly, sold a little hope with them. Not the gaudy jackpot fantasy, but the everyday hope that the town had learned to practice on each other. When a gust of wind curled around the corner, the roof above him shushed it. When a thin mist drifted through, it pearl-glossed the booth's new roof, and then was gone. Around 11, a man in a navy windbreaker broke the flow. He approached with a notepad, a press badge clipped to his jacket pocket. His smile was practiced, polite, persuasive. "Mr. Hayes? Matt from the Brookfield Gazette. Wonder if we might do a quick interview?" He gestured to the line, hands careful, deferential. After the rush, of course. Walter felt a familiar pressure, that sense of being asked to stand in a light brighter than he liked. He glanced at Harper. She didn't step in, didn't rescue him, but she made a small nod. "Barely there, you decide your pace." After lunch, Walter said to the reporter, surprising himself, "Come back at 1. I'll have time then." "Appreciate it," Matt said, and melted back from the counter like a tide retreating. By noon the line thinned. Earl drifted off with a salute. A teenage girl and her grandmother took a photo in front of the booth, hands up in a goofy pose that made Walter grin. Harper hung back as the crowd gave way to a lull. "Hungry?" she asked. "I could be persuaded," Walter said. "Come take your lunch at the shop. You can bring your tickets if it makes you feel better," she added lightly. "My door's a revolving one these days. Nobody will bother you in the back." He hesitated, glanced at the booth as if it might take offense to being left on its first day. Then he slid the tin box of change beneath the counter shelf, tucked the tickets under the cork tray, and lowered a tidy wooden hatch someone had built into the opening. It locked with a simple swivel latch that clicked like the period at the end of a sentence. "Smart," he said. "They thought of everything. They," Harper said, "are getting very good at being they." At Red Fern Coffee, the air was warm and cinnamon-sweet. Harper guided him past the register, through a half door to a small office that was really a nook with a desk and a bulletin board crowded with notes. Staff schedules, recipe cards, a Polaroid of the team wearing antlers on a December morning. She handed him a bowl of tomato soup and a grilled cheese sandwich that snapped when he bit it, the cheese stretching in clean, golden lines. "I don't know how to repay," he began. "You don't," she said, not unkindly. "Or maybe you already are, by letting people do the thing they're trying to do." He chewed on that, as much as the sandwich. Letting people help is harder than it looks. "Tell me about it," Harper said, and there was something in her voice then, a pocket of weight he hadn't noticed before. He glanced up. She was looking at the bulletin board, at a photo of a smiling woman with the same eyes as Harper, but creased with more years. "Your mom?" he asked softly. Harper nodded. "She ran this place before me. I tried to return the favor when she got sick. She wouldn't let me half the time." A small smile. "Stubbornness runs in our little town like a river." They ate in companionable quiet for a few minutes. At 1 o'clock, true to his word, Walter returned to the booth and gave the reporter 20 careful minutes. He spoke about the storm, but not about loneliness, about gratitude, but not about fear. The reporter was kind. He asked more about the community than about Walter's past, and Walter found the questions easier that way. By mid-afternoon, the sun had swung around and warmed the edge of the booth. A city-white truck idled briefly at the corner. A code inspector leaned out to look, frowned at something only he could see, then drove on. Walter filed that away in the drawer of his mind where worry lived. Permit? Rules? He knew there were rules for everything. Harper reappeared near closing with a stack of paper cups and a thermos of hot tea. "For your walk home," she said, "and for anyone who comes by late." He balanced the cups in the cork tray, the fern inked on its corner, catching a ray of light like a signature. "Harper," he said, the name now a comfortable word in his mouth, "did you start all this?" She looked at the booth, at the paint, at the way the town seemed to slow a fraction as it passed. "No," she said. "I think you did when you kept showing up. I just pointed." He nodded, the kind of nod that seals something without naming it. When the shadows lengthened, Walter closed the hatch, slipped the swivel latch, and thought again of the inspector and the city truck. The worry tugged, gentle but persistent. As he tucked the day's tin under his arm and lifted his satchel, a thin envelope slid from beneath the cork tray. He hadn't seen it placed there. No name on the front, just with a booth written in careful script. He opened it on the spot. Inside, a receipt from Brookfield Lumber with a zeroed-out total and a note in the margin, "Materials donated. Keep doing what you do. C. Alvarez and Class." He slid the receipt back in, felt a warmth that had nothing to do with tea. Dusk found him at his apartment door. the murmur of Main Street settling into evening. He set the tin on the table, the envelope beside it, the knit cap on the chair back like a small flag. He folded his coat, turned off the radio, stood for a moment looking at the neat line of generosity that had become, improbably, the border of his life. Sleep came quickly, but before it did, a thought circled. If there are rules for corners and booze, someone will come asking. He pictured a clipboard, a municipal seal, a form with too many lines. He didn't know that, miles away on the city's website, a notice had gone up that afternoon about sidewalk vending permits and compliance checks scheduled for the week. He didn't know that the code inspector had already marked a small star beside Main and Alder, wooden kiosk. He only knew the booth had changed something, and he hoped change could hold. The morning light slanted through the blinds in thin stripes, drawing faint lines across the table where Walter's tin cash box and yesterday's mail still sat. He dressed slowly, knees stiff, shoulders slow to loosen, and made his coffee the same way he always had, one spoonful of instant granules stirred into boiling water until the bitter steam rose. It was almost comforting to think today would be like the last. A steady walk to the corner, the smell of damp leaves, the booth waiting like an old friend. But when he reached Main and Alder, something new interrupted the picture. A yellow slip of paper, folded once and wedged between the hinge of the booth's hatch and the counter, flapped gently in the breeze. Walter felt a tightening in his chest before he even unfolded it. The notice. At the top was the Brookfield City seal, printed in blue. Below it, in tidy type, notice of non-compliance. Sidewalk vending structures must meet permit and measurement requirements under Municipal Code 4.12. Failure to comply may result in removal of unpermitted structures. Compliance check scheduled for November 14th. Near the bottom, a hand-drawn red circle around the date and the words, "Permit required. Apply within 7 business days." Walter read it twice, then a third time. The words seemed to grow heavier each time. 7 business days. That was barely a week. He didn't even know where to begin. A flash of the inspector's face from the other day, the man in the white truck, came back to him. So that's what that glance had meant. He folded the slip and slid it into his coat pocket. Customers would come soon, and the last thing he wanted was to hand them tickets with his worry written all over his face. But as he arranged a stack of tickets, the booth felt different, less like a gift, more like something fragile that might be taken away. Harper's first step. 2 blocks away, Harper Collins was already on her laptop in the back office of Redfern Coffee. The yellow slip sat in her inbox, scanned, and sent from Earl at the VFW with the subject line, "We've got a problem." Harper clicked through to the Brookfield City website, navigating through the slow, outdated menus until she found the vending permit section. The application alone was 5 pages, full of measurements, diagrams, and insurance requirements. She exhaled sharply. This wasn't something Walter could handle alone. And truth be told, Harper didn't like the thought of the booth vanishing any more than he did. She opened a spreadsheet and typed Walter Permit Fund in cell A1. Underneath, she started a to-do list. 1. Call City Hall. Ask for exact requirements. 2. Measure booth dimensions with Earl. 3. Check with Mr. Alvarez's class about possible modifications. 4. Rally community for application fee. Carla leaned into the doorway. "You're in here early," she said. "Got City Hall work to do," Harper replied, eyes still on the screen. For Walter, measuring the stakes. That afternoon, Earl met Harper at the booth with a tape measure. Walter stood by, uneasy, as they extended the metal strip along the counter, noted the roof overhang, and crouched to measure the base footprint. "It's a few inches too wide on the sidewalk side," Earl said, frowning. "That's going to be their excuse if they want to push it." "How easy is that to fix?" Harper asked. "Depends if you want it done right or fast," Earl replied. "With the shop class, maybe 2 days. On my own, 1 long night." Walter shifted his weight. "I don't want to cause trouble for anybody." "You didn't," Harper said firmly. "You showed up. That's it. The rest is on us now." City Hall. The next morning, Harper called City Hall. After 3 transfers and 12 minutes of hold music, she reached a clerk named Denise who sounded more tired than annoyed. "Yes, we've seen the post," Denise said when Harper explained who she was calling about. "We don't make the rules. We just have to enforce them. The booth is a sweet idea, but it has to meet code." Harper bit back the urge to point out that sweet idea was the only thing keeping Walter's income steady. "What's the fastest path to compliance?" she asked instead. "Application and photos by Friday," Denise replied. "Measurements showing it's within guidelines." And she paused the insurance line item. "For any structure on a public sidewalk." Harper scribbled notes. Got it. We'll make it happen. Mobilizing. By noon, Harper had rallied the beginnings of a small army. Earl and two of his VFW buddies promised to trim the booth's overhang. Mr. Alvarez said his woodshop students could be there after school to sand and reseal. Carla volunteered to run a donation jar at the coffee shop counter. They even printed a small flyer. Help keep Walter's booth. Brookfield loves Walter. Let's make sure City Hall does too. Donations accepted at Red Fern Coffee. Volunteers sign up at the VFW. By the end of the first day, the jar held $84 in small bills and change. Walter's reluctance. But Walter wasn't sure how he felt about all this. That evening, Harper found him at the booth as the sun dipped low. You're quiet, she said. Walter looked down the street. Feels strange. Everyone doing this for me. I've spent a long time making sure I didn't need much from anyone. Harper folded her arms, leaning against the booth. Needing something isn't a flaw, Walter. And sometimes the thing people need most is a reason to pull together. That's what you've given them. He let that sit between them for a moment, then nodded once. All right, I'll try to get used to it. The deadline nears. The next 2 days were a blur of work. The booth was trimmed, sanded, and resealed. Harper took photos from every angle. Earl handled the measuring diagrams, neat as a blueprint. Carla kept the donation jar in sight of every customer, adding a sticky note tally each hour. By Thursday evening, they had the permit fee covered and the application packet nearly complete. Harper had even managed to secure a letter from the Chamber of Commerce, praising the booth as a positive asset to Main Street. An unwelcome voice. But late Thursday, as Harper locked up the shop, a man she didn't recognize was waiting outside. He was in his 40s, wearing a faded baseball cap and a jacket with the logo of a local vending cart company. You the one helping the lottery guy? He asked. Harper stayed cautious. Why? Because he's taking sidewalk space that should be for licensed vendors like me, the man said flatly. I've been in line for a Main Street permit for 2 years. Now you're fast-tracking him? Harper's jaw tightened. We're following the same rules you are. Rules are rules, the man said. If the city bends them for him, you'll be hearing from more than just me. He walked off before she could reply. Harper stood there for a moment, the cool air heavy around her. She knew this could complicate things. Walter Hayes arrived at Main and Alder just after 8, earlier than usual, the November air crisp enough to sting his nose. The booth stood exactly as they'd left it the night before, freshly sanded, trimmed to regulation width, the counter wiped clean. The morning light caught the black lettering on the front. Walter's Tickets, the apostrophe still crisp despite the weather. On the counter sat a neat clipboard with a permit application, measurements, photographs, and the Chamber of Commerce letter, all paper clipped into a tidy stack. Harper had insisted they keep everything visible. If they see we've done our homework, she'd said, it sets the tone. Walter rested a hand on the booth's counter, feeling the solid grain beneath his palm. A week ago, this had been a gift. Today, it felt like something on trial. Harper arrives. Harper appeared moments later, a takeaway cup in each hand. She wore her red scarf and the same steady expression she'd had the day she bought his entire stack of tickets in the rain. You okay? She asked, handing him one of the coffees. I've been better, Walter admitted. Feels like I'm waiting to see if they'll pull the rug out from under me. They won't, she said, with a confidence that made him almost believe it. We've done everything right. The white truck. At 8:45, the rumble of a city vehicle rolled up the street. A white pickup with a Brookfield seal on its door eased to a stop near the booth. The inspector from earlier in the week stepped out, navy jacket, clipboard in hand, pen clipped to the breast pocket. Walter noticed him glance across the street first, where the rival vendor from Thursday stood, arms crossed, a paper coffee cup steaming in one hand. The man didn't smile, didn't wave, just watched. The inspector approached the booth, his boots making hollow sounds on the sidewalk. Mr. Hayes? He asked. Yes, sir, Walter said. I'm here for the compliance check, the inspector said, flipping open his clipboard. His voice was neutral, neither friendly nor hostile. I'll need to take some measurements and review your documentation. Harper stepped forward. We've got everything ready. Measurements, photos, application, the chamber letter. She gestured to the clipboard on the counter. The inspector raised an eyebrow, then began leafing through the papers. You've got this organized, he said, almost himself. Measuring the booth. He took out a metal tape measure and began checking every dimension. Width of the base, overhang of the roof, depth from the curb. Earl had been right. They trimmed it to the inch. Base is within regulation, the inspector murmured. Roof overhangs fine. He crouched, measured again. Clearance for pedestrians is good. Walter watched, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Across the street, the rival vendor shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on every movement of the tape measure. The questions. Once the physical check was done, the inspector set the tape measure aside and flipped to a different page on his clipboard. Mr. Hayes, are you the sole operator of this booth? Yes. And you're selling only state-issued lottery tickets? That's right. No food, beverages, or other merchandise. Walter shook his head. Just tickets. The inspector nodded, scribbling. And you understand this permit, if approved, will require annual renewal? I understand. He glanced at Harper. And you are? Harper Collins. I've been helping coordinate the permit process. I see, the inspector said, his pen still moving. Community backup. Just then, a woman in a green scarf, the same one who'd been first in line on the booth's opening day, walked up with a folded piece of paper. Mr. Inspector, she said politely, this is a petition from folks in town who support keeping this booth. Over 100 signatures. The inspector took it, flipping through the pages. More townspeople had begun to gather. Almost casually, Earl, a few of the woodshop students in their Letterman jackets, a pair of regulars from Red Fern Coffee. They didn't crowd, but their presence filled the air with quiet solidarity. Walter felt it like a current under the surface, people showing up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The decision. The inspector closed his clipboard. I've reviewed the structure, the documentation, and community feedback, he said. The booth meets municipal code requirements. Pending final processing of the permit application, you may continue operating here. Walter exhaled, though he hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. The inspector went on. I'll recommend an annual review, same as any vendor. As long as the booth remains compliant, there should be no issue. From across the street, the rival vendor muttered something under his breath and walked away, coffee cups sloshing. Aftermath. Applause broke out. Not loud, not rowdy, but enough to make Walter's ears warm. Earl clapped him on the back. The green scarf woman grinned. A woodshop student asked if he could take a picture with Walter from Mr. Alvarez. Harper leaned against the booth, her smile easy. Told you, she said. Walter looked at her, his voice low. I don't know how to thank you. Sell me a ticket, she said. And maybe stop worrying so much. First sale of the day. Walter slid a ticket across the counter. Harper handed over a dollar bill, crisp and new. There, she said. First official sale from the legally permitted booth of Walter Hayes. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that shakes off more than one kind of weight. A quiet moment. By mid-morning, the small crowd had dispersed. Walter stood behind the booth, tickets fanned neatly in front of him, the November sun warming his shoulders. The yellow slip from the start of the week was gone, replaced in his mind by the inspector's words. You may continue operating here. He thought about the last month, how a stranger with a red umbrella had stopped in the rain, how that had led to this. The booth, the crowd, the permit. None of it would have happened if not for that one small act.